I'm the one.
Good morning. Antonio, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, Mia.
Good morning.
Very good morning to everyone. Morning, Runa. Good morning, Honorable Minister.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon and belated Eid Mubarak to everyone. Shariat here.
Assalamu
Eid
alaikum.
Mubarak. Yeah.
Greetings, everybody. I hope you can all see me and hear me. I can see people nodding, so that's the signal. Thank you very much. I think we have a critical mass of people and we can start our proceedings. My name is Filippo Grandi. For those of you who do not know me, I'm the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. I represent UNHCR here, and I have the great honor of coordinating this important meeting. This is the fourth time that we get together on this occasion to launch the Joint Response Plan. The Joint Response Plan, as you all know, is the plan which the government of Bangladesh leads to continue to respond to the crisis generated by the influx of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar into Bangladesh. And we're gathered today once again. Unfortunately, I would say, we have to gather again. The crisis continues for the fourth time to express, hopefully in the most concrete terms, our support for the government of Bangladesh in carrying out the generous task of hosting almost 900,000 Rohingya refugees. I will not say much now because we have speakers on a panel that will give you different perspectives, important perspectives on this program. I will just say something at the end before opening the floor for interventions from participants in this meeting, and hopefully, let me stress it again, concrete pledges of support to the program that is presented today. But I would like to, before I introduce the panelists, I would like to really thank all of you for the support that you have continued to provide over the past few years. I'm speaking of the support provided by governments, of course, in the forms of financial contribution, of the contributions provided by UN agencies, civil society, NGOs, to the collective response. And of course, the biggest thanks goes to the government of Bangladesh for its continued commitment to providing protection and sanctuary to 900,000 refugees. This is a particularly difficult time also with the evolution of the situation in Myanmar. Clearly doesn't make our collective task and the Bangladesh specific hospitality any easier. So very important that we get together. Let me introduce the other 5 speakers that will help me explain to you what it is all about. First and foremost, the State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, my friend Mohammed Shahriar Alam. Welcome once again. You've been with us in this event many times before, and we're happy to see you back here, although in a virtual way. Let me introduce my colleague. Most of you know him very well, and friend Antonio Vitorino, the Director General of the International Organization for Migration, and also my colleague Mia Seppo, the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh. I think she is in Bangladesh right now. She has a map on the back, but I think she's in Bangladesh. Yes, she's nodding. Mia, very good to see you. We just discussed with the minister an early visit to Bangladesh, so we hope that we will be able to see you soon in person. And then, very important, I would like to also introduce 2 representatives of civil society, Mrs. Runa Khan of the NGO Friendship. It's a great honor to have you here, Ms. Runa, and we are looking forward to your contribution. And the same warm welcome is extended to Ola Murphy, who is the director of the country director in Bangladesh for the NGO Plan International, who is Plan International is a very important partner, at least of UNHCR, and I'm sure of other United Nations organizations around the world and in Bangladesh too. It's very important to have both your voices on this panel and to hear your point of view, especially at these difficult times. I should have mentioned not only, of course, the evolution in Myanmar, but the pandemic. We just had a chat with the minister about that, and we must recognize that Bangladesh is particularly under pressure at the moment, as is the whole region. So one more reason to really manifest and express our solidarity with them. Before I go back to every one of the speakers for a brief introduction, we have a little video that we would like to watch together. I hope it can be put on.
Barilla, Gorolla, Mani, Vida Barilla, Zedin Tagi, Nolakitur. Monobutor Manipuri, Barman Lapuri.
Kaya jacket tu beda tu jacket baru boleh pari jalan le, malah lagi.
মদত পাই এখন আল্লাহর কাছে শুকরিয়া আদায় করছি
Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this video helped create the right context and atmosphere for this event. And it is now, without any further ado, my great honor to give the floor to State Minister Mohammed Sharia Alam. The floor is yours, Minister.
Thank you. Excellencies, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, dear friend Filippo Grande, Director General IOM, Antonio Vitorina, UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh, Mia Seppo, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank the organizers for inviting me to the launching event of the 4th JRP. Every year, we join the launching with the hope that this will be the last one of this kind. However, the lingering crisis compels us to launch yet another response plan. I avail this opportunity to express our sincere appreciation to the international partners for their continuous humanitarian support to nearly 1 million forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals temporarily sheltered in Bangladesh. As I speak today, the question that strikes my mind, that I'm sure this is resonating also in the minds of many of the audience today: how long? How long do we have to bear this burden? And how long can the international community sustain this level of humanitarian support? We already in the 4th year of the latest exodus that took place in 2017. At this stage, we must concentrate on the solution of the crisis so that we do not need to have a similar exercise for resource mobilization of this scale every year. As you all know, in 2017, when the persecuted Rohingyas were fleeing from violence and atrocities in Myanmar, it was Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and the people of Bangladesh who demonstrated unmatchable compassion and humanitarian gesture by extending temporary refuge to the Rohingyas and thus saved lives of 1 million. No second country came forward to demonstrate this level of humanitarian leadership. Since then, despite our resource constraints, we have been trying to ensure the best possible humanitarian assistance to the displaced Rohingyas and also their safety, security, and well-being. Even during this pandemic, our timely intervention and practical measures in coordination with the UN and humanitarian partners helped in containing the spread of the virus in the camps. Excellencies, for the last 4 years, the government has deployed a huge number of public officials and police and security forces for operating the camps. They remain deployed at the cost of their service to our own people. Moreover, the lingering stay of the Rohingyas has caused lasting environmental and ecological damage, including destruction of 6,800 acres of prime forest land. These camp population have tremendously overwhelmed the public service delivery and infrastructure in Cox's Bazar, causing massive disruption of the host community. In order to decongest and de-risk the camps, Bangladesh has developed Bhashan Char with required amenities and better facilities from its own resources. We have spent more than $350 million to develop the island. As we have mentioned before, the government of Bangladesh has set a target to relocate, on a voluntary basis, of course, 100,000 Rohingyas to the island. So far, around 18,000 Rohingyas have been shifted there voluntarily. However, our unique positive gestures have often been misinterpreted and are differently portrayed. Such approaches are unhelpful in managing the crisis. We all need to work together to minimize the misunderstanding. Excellencies, it is encouraging that the UN team, as well as a group of ambassadors, has now visited Bhashan Char and seen the existing facilities. We expect the UN full involvement and the initiation of their full-fledged activities in Vashanchar at the earliest. Excellencies, while launching this year's 4th JRP, I would like to underscore a number of key priorities for Bangladesh. Firstly, we must hit the nail on the head and focus on the solution of the crisis. As we have repeatedly mentioned in our earlier interventions, return of the Rohingyas to their homeland is the only solution. All undertakings under the JRP or any other funding mechanism should be designed and implemented keeping their overarching objective in mind, this objective in mind. Humanitarian assistance is essential, but this would not solve the problem permanently. The international community, including the UN, must intensify their focus on the permanent solution, which lies in the sustainable return and reintegration of Rohingyas back in Myanmar. Secondly, the priority areas that have been identified in the JRP must be aligned with the core objective of preparing the Rohingyas for their return. Any project such as education or skill development should be implemented in ways that will help Rohingyas to integrate in their society upon their return to Myanmar. While we agreed in principle to allow education for Rohingya children, we stress that any education project follows Myanmar curriculum and Myanmar language, so that the Rohingyas do not forget their own language and culture and can access knowledge and skills in their mother tongue for better learning and eventual reintegration into Myanmar society. Thirdly, the efforts that we undertake for Rohingyas in Bangladesh, be it in Cox's Bazar or in Vashanchar, must reflect the temporariness of their stay in Bangladesh and be relevant in the context of their eventual return to Myanmar. The JRP should give due emphasis on these key elements, and humanitarian agencies should carefully design their assistance package in commensurate with the ground reality and opportunities available in places of return. Fourthly, we must not forget the environmental and ecological aspects in and around the camp area. No project under the JRP should further deteriorate the landscape and ecosystem. Rather, projects should be designed in such a way that would contribute to restore and improve the situation. Fifthly, the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh has repeatedly stated that, I quote, "The problem was created by Myanmar and its solution must be found in Myanmar." Unfortunately, Myanmar has reneged on its bilateral commitment to Bangladesh and promised to the international community to create a conducive environment in Rakhine. Moreover, we are yet to see any meaningful engagement of the international community with Myanmar to change the situation on the ground and create conditions for Rohingyas to return. Distinguished delegates, I'd like to reiterate that the earliest repatriation of all displaced Rohingyas to their homeland in Rakhine remains a compelling priority for the government of Bangladesh. Under the bilateral instruments on return, Myanmar agreed to take necessary measures to commence repatriation in a safe, dignified, and voluntary manner. Unfortunately, not a single Rohingya could return due to lack of political will and decisive action on the part of Myanmar. Our intense diplomatic démarche and repeated appeal have hitherto failed to bring about any positive shift in Myanmar's mindset and approach. We are closely monitoring the current development in Myanmar. We strongly believe that the situation should not relegate discussions on repatriation. We also welcome ASEAN's recent initiatives to engage Myanmar. This has generated some rays of hope. We are eagerly looking forward to seeing the constructive engagement of ASEAN Special Envoy with Myanmar Authority on the repatriation issue. The international community should revisit its approach and should work constructively before it gets too late. On our part, we remain ready to extend all kinds of support to any initiatives toward the permanent solution of the crisis. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Minister, much appreciated. And let me now give the floor to Antonio Vitorino, the Director General of IOM. Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Filippo, and Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking the government of Bangladesh, the resident coordinator, Mia, and UNHCR for the very close and fruitful cooperation in the field, and most particularly to thank the contribution of the civil society and the NGO community to tackle with, in the last year, with a new threat, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. I must start by saying that in my assessment, we were quite successful in containing the spread of the virus in the camps, which was at the beginning of the pandemic one of my worst personal nightmares. But of course, we need to recognize at the same time that the pandemic that hit the host communities and the refugees has an enormous social economic impact. And our main concern when we launched the JRP is that some coping strategies to deal with the impacts of the pandemic show to be extremely negative. And we need to address those challenges that are equally targeting the host communities and the Rohingya refugees. We notice a rise in the numbers of human trafficking, for labor exploitation and for sexual exploitation. And we believe that the GRP needs to give priority to mitigate those risks of negative coping strategies, encourage cash for work programs, basic economic activities such as markets and selling goods, skills training with particularly focus on access to education for children, and the video showed that the pandemic disrupted 86% of the education capacity in the camps, and other self-reliance opportunities, both for men and for women. The second message is that, unfortunately, as we all know, the Cox's Bazar communities continue to be highly vulnerable to natural hazards, as well as the cyclones and the monsoons. We had a very negative experience, as you all know, very recently with a mega fire that destroyed the households of 38,000 people in Cox's Bazar and the health facilities of Médecins Sans Frontières and of IOM. It is absolutely necessary to build back better in order to guarantee the safety of the Rohingya refugees. My third message is that, of course, we share with the government of Bangladesh the concern about the security of refugees and host communities. And we understand that on a number of occasions, it is necessary to have physical measures that have a security impact. We make a plea in order that those physical security measures will not create artificial barriers between refugees and host communities, because it is extremely important to build mutual trust between both communities. My third and last remark is about the Rohingya refugees' direct participation in the response. That we believe it has an added value. It improves the quality of humanitarian services and builds resilience. Indeed, the self-reliance of the refugee community is a building block of the overall solution for the situation of the refugees when they are repatriated to Myanmar. And as the minister has said, the only solution for this situation is to have the Rohingya community being back to Myanmar, seeing their rights recognized, fully recognized, and finding durable solutions in their homeland. We encourage the initiatives of ASEAN and OPSFOLI, and we sincerely hope that the international community will go on putting pressure on Myanmar to find durable solutions in Rakhine State, not just for the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar, but also for those Rohingya who are in the territory of Myanmar. Unfortunately, recent events in Myanmar need to be followed very closely, and we, from our side, do that together with the entire UN system. So, Filippo, I want to reiterate my thanks to the cooperation with the government of Bangladesh and launch my appeal to the international community to show solidarity with the government of Bangladesh, but above all, with the host communities in Cox's Bazar, and also above and foremost, with the refugee Rohingya community in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. Thank you very much, Antonio. And now I'll give the floor to the UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh, Mia Seppo. Mia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable State Minister, High Commissioner Grandi, DG Vitorino, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon to you from Dhaka. Thank you for this opportunity to make this statement on behalf of the 9 operational UN agencies working on the Rohingya refugee response in Cox's Bazar: UNHCR, IOM, WFP, UNICEF, UNFPA, UN Women, WHO, FAO, and UNDP. Since we launched the 2020 JRP in March in Geneva last year, the world has been confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic. So too Bangladesh and the Rohingya settlements in Cox's Bazar, some of the most densely populated places on Earth. In support of the government's COVID response, we took collective action to curb the spread of the virus by expanding COVID-19 health facilities, services, and testing, limiting the movement of humanitarian personnel to the camps, and scaling back to critical activities only, while also supporting refugee men and women to respond to the needs of their own communities. These efforts have so far been largely effective in reducing the worst of the projected impact of COVID in Cox's Bazar, as was recognized by the Honorable State Minister and DG Vitorino. But uncertainties remain, and there is no place for complacency. At the same time, we also need to recognize that scaling back to critical activities only has come at the cost of the quality of life of affected communities and a full response. We have not been able to roll out the new activities as planned. This includes the Myanmar curriculum or expand skills building activities, better coordination of development assistance for host communities, which is to offset the impact of hosting large numbers of refugees, is still needed. When the situation allows, we plan to quickly scale up these critical activities. This is particularly important for almost 500,000 children, many of whom have been seriously impacted by the ongoing pandemic. We need to ensure they have productive ways to spend their time by offering them learning opportunities and preparing them for return. The 2021 JRP is the result of a consultative process ably led by the Intersector Coordination Group in Cox's Bazar, involving all stakeholders, affected communities, the UN and NGOs, local authorities, and development partners. There has also been extensive consultations on the JRP with the government, particularly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I want to thank the Honourable State Minister for his valuable remarks and for joining us for a 4th time in launching a joint response plan. These consultations have helped us streamline the 2021 JRP, which we hope will provide a template for future versions and which we hope makes this a more easily accessible tool for all. We recognize that the process of formulating the JRP can be further improved, and we will have discussions with the various constituencies in advance of the formulation of the 2022 JRP, if indeed we will need one again. Allow me to make 4 brief observations on the content of the 2021 JRP. First, the JRP retains a significant focus, some 2/3 of the total amount targeted on providing life-saving assistance and services, including food and nutrition, healthcare, shelter, water, and sanitation. Let me be clear, support for these activities in Cox's Bazar remains absolutely critical in 2021, particularly given that the refugees are still largely dependent on humanitarian assistance, not permitted to leave the camps to work and as others around the world greatly affected by the ongoing pandemic. Second, the 2021 JRP, as High Commissioner Grandi has already noted, also continues to be guided by a protection framework which recognizes the need for a clear focus on targeted protection issues and activities. This includes a strong commitment from the UN and its partners to a community-led, rights-based and participatory approach to the provision of assistance and protection services, gender, age and disability mainstreaming, preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, and accountability and do no harm to affected populations. This is important as we have seen increased securitization of the camps and the deterioration of the protection environment in the last year. We must therefore work in support of the government to ensure that the civilian and humanitarian nature of the camps is maintained. Easy and predictable humanitarian access to the camps is preserved, and affected communities are consulted on the decisions that affect their lives and well-being, and they play a role in the protection of their own communities. Third, the plan makes a renewed commitment to working towards sustainable solutions in Myanmar, as reflected in Strategic Objective 4. Voluntary and sustainable repatriation in safety and dignity remains the wish of the majority of the refugees in Bangladesh and a shared objective of the government and the UN. In Bangladesh, we will continue to support refugees to build the skills to support their eventual sustainable reintegration in Myanmar. The UN in Myanmar continues to try and lay the foundation for sustainable return. And we will, of course, continue to monitor the evolving situation in Myanmar and its impact on Bangladesh and the region. Fourth, the 2021 JRP recognizes the notable developments in relation to Bhasan Char. Since the last launch, the government has relocated some 18,000 Rohingya refugees to the island. A UN in Bangladesh team visit facilitated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs took place from the 17th to the 20th March this year to look at the situation and the feasibility of establishing humanitarian operations there. Further to this visit, the UN has recognized the significant investment the government has made on the island, as well as the clear protection and humanitarian imperative of the Rohingya refugees living there. The UN has shared its findings and made a number of key recommendations to the government. The government and the UN have now agreed to further discussions regarding future UN operational engagement on Bhasan Char, including on the framework that governs the life and well-being of Rohingya refugees on the island. We hope these discussions will take place as soon as possible. Let me also note, and referring to the call from the Honourable State Minister on addressing the environmental damage, and quote Tagore, who wrote, "Trees are the earth's endless effort to speak to the listening heavens," and recognize that the 2021 JRP will continue the efforts of greening the camps and restoring the environment. In closing, I would like to recognize the participation on the panel of my NGO colleagues, Runa Khan and Ola Murphy. NGOs, both Bangladeshi and international, continue to play a critical role in the response. And the majority of the JRP partners are Bangladeshi NGOs. The mainstreaming of localization and the predictable and effective access of NGOs remain key priorities in 2021. Allow me to lastly thank all the colleagues engaged in the response in Bangladesh, the government of Bangladesh, and most importantly, the Rohingya refugees themselves, who work hard each day to keep the camps calm and to ensure an effective response. Let me note that we are immensely grateful for the continued support to the JRPs. This indeed, as High Commissioner Grandi noted, being the fourth one. We hope you will continue to support the response to the Rohingya crisis and Bangladesh, who continues to be generous hosts for the Rohingya and bear an enormous responsibility for this crisis. We have a better chance of facing the challenges and the opportunities ahead if we do it together. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mia. I have now the pleasure of giving the floor to Runa Khan of Friendship. The floor is yours. I think you are on mute, madam. We do not hear you anyway.
Yes.
Now, yes. Thank you.
Am I there? Can you hear me now? I'm sorry about that.
Now, loud
Can you
and
hear
clear.
me?
We hear you very well now. Go ahead. Yes.
Can you
But
hear
you
me
cannot
now?
hear us. Yes, 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 yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Runa, very well.
I'm very
Please
sorry.
proceed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. We can hear you.
Yes. Honorable Minister, honorable fellow panelists, first of all, I deeply thank the government of Bangladesh, both at policy level and local levels, UN bodies, INGOs, Bangladeshi NGOs. It's not working.
We can hear you very well. We can hear you very well. Yeah, yeah.
Honorable ministers, honorable fellow panelists, first of all, I deeply thank the government of Bangladesh, both at policy level and local levels, UN bodies, INGOs, Bangladeshi NGOs, and the host communities for making instant decisions ensuring the survival of sudden influx of nearly 1 million Rohingyas into a country battling continuously with overpopulation and natural disasters. Each stakeholders have had their share of difficulties in handling this crisis. In spite of the odds, with the eyes of the world looking at us in Bangladesh quite quizzically sometimes, seemingly even forgetting who caused the crisis to happen, we have done quite well. Possibly because the crisis hit, all involved have looked beyond themselves and striven to work in the interest, not of any country or organization, but of the Rohingyas as human beings in disasters. Now in the fourth year of crisis, without doubt, everyone is a bit tired. New difficulties are arising in solidarity, cooperation, making focused decisions, clarity of vision, roles and responsibilities, resulting thus in a lack of efficiency and a lack of output. We see this happening. Clear, mutually agreed, understandable, functionally efficient pathways are needed at this point. An indispensable factor for effectiveness and respectful cooperation is transparency. How can cost efficiency be ensured if there is insufficient transparency of how and to whom scarce resources are allocated? Financial accountability is core. All along the funding chain, rather than being imposed top-down, and amounts being known, but not the distribution of it. Each of the stakeholders have a role to play. And here, none of us must fall in the trap of being guided by our own organizational interest, but by the fact that we all have elements of strengths. It is only by fitting these strengths harmoniously together, understanding and respecting each other's roles, that we can achieve the best outcome for what and whom we are all working towards. For us NGOs, if a 3-month emergency project takes 20 steps of permits and reporting after months of negotiation with donors for obvious implementation cost, in spite of goodwill from everyone, ineffectiveness happens. Inefficiency is particularly dangerous in today's world. The Rohingyas must not become a forgotten crisis. With disasters, panic, and world economy in turbulence, this is a real danger. Risk of donor fatigue must not be fueled by suboptimal use of always limited resources and impractical standards for services within Bangladesh and the reality of Bangladesh. We need continuity of projects for impactful work. both for Rohingyas and for hosts. Emergency to emergency programs over 4 years cannot be a norm. In this respect, I request that we step back and reflect on what it is that we are all striving towards. Bringing dignity, opportunity, and hope for human beings is part of who we are, of what humanity is about. We need to ensure that the guests we have in our midst, when they go home, they can go back better skilled, more empowered citizens of their own country who are capable of contributing to the development of their communities. While pending possible return to Myanmar, such improved skills will also enable a more meaningful camp life to develop. We must look into this. Programs favoring human self-respect will allow safety and security to strengthen in a situation where dangers of temptation and easy escapes can become a norm. Occupying youth and adults in skills and allowing people to live a life with dignity and self-sufficiency helps them choose the right paths with hopes for their lives. Actions and clear decisions are needed urgently. Also for long-term impacts, biodiversity loss from trees to elephants, with the disappearance of our green zone, return of vacant lands in Ukhiya to hosts to ease rising tensions, all are necessary. And now, Bhashanchar, a strive for us, Bangladesh, to give decent living, safety and access to services for Rohingyas and lighten the pressure of the camps in Ukhiya. I note with a kind of relief that following the UN visit to Bangladesh, as stated in the Joint Response Plan, everybody seems to clearly recognize the humanitarian and protection needs of the Rohingyas already relocated to Bhashanchar, and that the services provided there by NGOs need to be continued and developed. It is obvious, however, that no NGO can sustain and develop such services much longer if we don't get institutional funding. Thus, I hope that goodwill and cooperation among all stakeholders at institutional level will allow an addendum to the Joint Response Plan to very soon include support for Bhashanchar. And that in the meanwhile, bilateral donor agencies will already start providing support to NGOs who are working there. Otherwise, the Rohingyas will unavoidably be the victims of processes that are totally out of their control. We all understand that a crisis of this magnitude does not disappear with ad hoc actions, funds, or even goodwill. I urge the government and our partners to take timely, needed, conscience-driven decisions so that we can work with continuous coordination, solidarity, respect between all of our stakeholders. I urge the stakeholders to take long-term visionary decisions along with systematic management trainings where needed, wherever necessary, planning and ensuring transparency of action by all at all levels to avoid self-interest and inefficiency in the implementation of necessary actions and services. For in the end, we need the life to continue with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rona, for this very good statement. And I now give the floor to Orla Murphy, Country Director of Plan International in Bangladesh. Orla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. I hope you can hear me. First, I would like to thank the government of Bangladesh, Mr. Shahriar Alam, the Honourable State Minister, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'd like to thank Mr. Vitorino, Mr. Grande and Mia, and all of the other partners for giving the INGOs a space to talk to you today. I work for one NGO, but I represent the voice of the INGO community today. The Rohingya crisis has become a protracted crisis as we approach the 4th anniversary of the Myanmar military's violent campaign against the Rohingya in August 2017. More than 800,000 Rohingya people were forced to flee Myanmar and cross the border into Bangladesh in search of safety and shelter. They were welcomed by the government of Bangladesh and the host community in Cox's Bazar. In Myanmar, Rohingya have long suffered persecution. Since the Myanmar military seized power on the 1st of February, the future and safety of Rohingya in Myanmar and repatriation of Rohingyas from Bangladesh has never been more uncertain. Refugees tell us that they long to go home, but they need promises. They want to hear that their rights are respected, their citizenship restored, and that they can move freely and use their own name. They're still waiting for Myanmar to take these steps. There is an urgent need for the international community to provide long-term support to the Rohingya refugees, the host community, and to the government of Bangladesh. For 4 years, refugees have survived off food aid. They've received healthcare, water and sanitation, and protection services. They're living in temporary shelters made out of light and highly flammable tarpaulin and bamboo. There are 840,000 women, men, girls, and boys, and they do deserve more. There are more than 440,000 Rohingya children, and they're quickly becoming a lost generation. Boys and girls without access to formal and accredited education, and their parents don't have access to livelihood opportunities, both of which would allow them a semblance of dignity and the ability to integrate more easily into society when the conditions are safe for them to return to Myanmar. INGOs increasingly take on a complementary role in delivering this sectorial work through our strong partnership with Bangladeshi NGOs and the government of Bangladesh, working to strengthen capacity around technical standards, as well as ensuring continued advocacy for the rights of a highly vulnerable refugee population. We do note with regret the absence of refugees in today's discussion. I know we have a video after this, but actually hearing in real time, I think, is something different. Living in this context where refugees are relying on the generosity of the government of Bangladesh and upon foreign aid, refugees tell us that they have little control over their lives and have been disenfranchised from making decisions that affect their daily lives in the present and in the future. As INGOs, we commit to do more to ensure the systematic inclusion of refugees, and in particular women and youth, in discussions that affect their lives. But despite all of these challenges, in 2020 and 2021, we saw refugees take on massive responsibility for running of the camp during the COVID-19 lockdowns, stepping up to ensure critical services such as shelter repair, legal support reaching communities when our staff really couldn't have access. Recently, the safety and protection risks refugees are exposed to has reached a critical point. Refugees report a sense of fear and insecurity due to the recent fires. They are concerned about the upcoming monsoon and the limited presence of humanitarian actors in the camps due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The principle of protection by presence has been challenged during COVID by the limitations on humanitarians and in particular protection activities. As a result, abuse and acts of violence, particularly gender-based violence and trafficking have increased. Refugees in return have felt left with limited support when confronted with threats, abuse and violence. Their personal safety and well-being has suffered. We must continue to work as a global community to support Rohingya refugees to live a safe and dignified life in the refugee camps in Bangladesh until durable solutions to the Rohingya crisis can be realized. The international community can support these efforts through their financial commitments which support Rohingya women, men, girls and boys to exercise their rights, to participate in decision-making, access humanitarian services and access opportunities for livelihoods, cash for work, and formal and we hope accredited education. Host communities who so generously welcomed the Rohingyas 4 years ago also need continued support. The financial contributions and actions taken now can support Rohingya refugees to live in a dignified life in the refugee camps and support their skills and resilience when they have a chance to return home to Myanmar. I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 1 second. Sorry, I was asking for the protocol of the meeting here. We have a short video of the, and after that, I'll say a few words and open the floor for the participants. So let's watch the video now.
Assalamualaikum. Anna Ummal hai. तो आई 17 বছর তো आई 2017 সালত আসি তো এখন আসি দে আরা 4 বছর তো आई এখন বাংলাদেশ রিফিউজি ক্যাম্পত থাকি তো হাজুর হয়তো চাইলে ক্যাম্প আমাদের করোনা ভাইরাস হওয়ার পরে পয়েন্টে কিছু করি না পারে তো মানুষজন লেই দিলা পারে তো করোনা ভাইরাস নয়বার আগতো মানে নয়বার আগতো পয়েন্টে স্কুলে যা পাইতো এর মানে বহুত কিছু শিখি পাইতো এত করোনা ভাইরাস হয়ে তো পয়েন্ট আর কিছু শিখি তো পরিয়ার সেটা আছে আর ওদিন এর ফরদা আছে গুড়া গুড়া পয়েন্ট আছে বর্মা তরুণ পর্যাদা আছে আর ওদিন পরি না পারেদা আছে তো তার এখন বই থেকে তারা যদি ফান্না নফরে থান কইলে পরি না পারে থান কইলে তার আর ফিউচার আল্লাহ বালা নইব তাই আই সাইডে ক্যাম্পর মাঝে পয়েন্ট আছে তো আগে তো পরিয়ার সেদে হিনরে মানে হাই লেভেলের এডুকেশন দিলে ভালো হইব তো আই যখন বর্মা আসছিলাম তাই ক্লাস 9 আসছিলাম তো ফান্না পড়তাম তো দেশ যত বাগি তো এর আর পড়ি না পারি দিয়া পড়ছে তো আই হনো ফান্না পড়ি না পারি তো আই মানে বড় হাই লেভেলের এডুকেশন চাই মানে আই ফান্না পড়তে চাই
আসসালামু আলাইকুম রহমতুল্লাহি ওয়া বারাকাতুহু আর নাম হলো আমির হাকিম আর বসলে 42 বছর তোলে আই বাংলাদেশের ক্যাম্পর মাঝে আসিছি দেশে শান্তি কিয়াং হলে আতুন নিজত্ব এক ফ্যামিলির মাঝে 9 জন মানুষ আছে এক কাটা করলে এর বেশি কষ্ট অথবা পয়েন্ট দর হয়ে শিক্ষাটা করে না পারিস জ্ঞান লাই বলি এর আর জাগালে এর বেশি কষ্ট তো কষ্ট চলে এখন কি করছম মমিকে পয়েন্টের ফান্না ফরাই না পারিস বাইরে এসে স্কুল বনে গিয়ে জ্ঞান আল্লাহ মমিকে যদি আর ফান্না ফরাই ফাজিয়াং হলে তাহলে আর ঘর বাড়ি পয়েন্ট দিল্লা বেশি সুযোগ হবো জ্ঞান আল্লাহ বলি এর আর বেশি মমিকে ফান্না ফরাই বলা চাই মানে ক্যাম্পত আগে আসছিলাম যে শুরুর মাঝে একখানা কষ্ট আসছিল এখন একখানা সুবিধা মিটি আর সুবিধা হইলিও আর বর্মত আসছিলাম যে ইন্দিলে সুবিধা নলাগে তো নলাগিলে এখন বিহতর দিতে বাহ্য হিসাবে তারপরে তো তাহাতে তো তোর আর হামাখা যাই বিলে চাই দিয়ে ওয়ান সন্দিলা বলি হলে আর জ্ঞান আল্লাহ বলি বর্মত চাই আর বাংলাদেশে আসি জ্ঞান যদি আর পাই বলে হলে নিজের হাতর মাঝে তাহলে আর যাই বলা ইচ্ছা জাহির করে এখন আর কেমন জরুরত হলে এলমর মাঝে পয়েন্ট শিক্ষা করেন এলমর জরুরত তাহলে এলম ইয়ান আমাকে জরুরত দিবি যেখানে জায়গার মাঝে এলম ছাড়া হনা হাস নচলে ইয়ান আল্লাহ বলি আর বর্মত আসছিলাম যে ইয়ানোর মাঝে লেখাপড়া গড়ি না পারি এখন এড়িয়ে যদি গড়ি না পারি হলে আর হনা জায়গার মাঝে আমাকে বিহতত বাজি ইয়ান আল্লাহ বলি
আসসালামু আলাইকুম আর নাম মিয়ারা এখন আর এসে দিয়ে বর্মতুন বেশি কষ্ট আমাদের ক্যাম্পত আর তো না হলে জায়গা হইতে সড়ো আর তা দাবাই সকল বেশ লাগে আর ভবিষ্যৎ রাস্তা মানে কাই অনেক কষ্ট আমাদের আজ মানে কি এত জামা নাই তো আর তো অনেক কষ্ট মানে কি দাবাই সুদ করে নেওয়ার ফাইন ধরে হানা দিনা পারি মানে কি টিয়া তানে হানা পয়সা দি পারি নাস্তা করে হাওয়া পারি আইন হাওয়া নেওয়া পারি ahon kamma da ratun ahon baramma da onak dace mohor মানে কি আরাতন বর্মাস জানুয়ারি কি আরার যে বালাকা তান আরার সুন্দর করে সানজারা পাঁচারে হলি বালা করে আরা জয়া তৈয়ার আছে আরা পিনলাই বাক্তা কি বললাই আসো তারপর দিবলাই আরাম বেশদার হারগরি কি আনলাই আর তো আসো তার লাগে স্কুল লাগে মানে কি আরার পানি নহন পান্না করে নেওয়ারে হস্তন মানে আরা পানি অনেক যদি শুকরিয়া আই আর দুধ জায়গা বাইরে আর শুকরিয়া আলহামদুলিল্লাহ
Thank you all for watching this important video. Let me say some concluding remarks regarding this introductory part of the meeting. I will just say a few words because my fellow panelists have been very eloquent and detailed and I think very clearly gave their different perspectives on what this joint response plan means and about the situation on the ground. And let me start by saying that I very much agree once again, as I have always agreed with what the state minister emphasized at the beginning of his intervention by saying that we must, in spite of all difficulties, we must remain focused on solutions in Myanmar. This is, of course, more difficult now, more complicated after the events of the 1st of February. It has added a layer of difficulty to the efforts that we're already making there. And by the way, let me take this opportunity, although this is outside the scope of the joint response plan, to echo the calls made by the UN Secretary General for the violence in Myanmar to stop, and for other neighboring countries to Myanmar, namely India and Thailand, to give refuge to the people that are seeking that refuge and fleeing. These are not Rohingya people coming to Bangladesh. Unfortunately, there are other displacement patterns going on in Myanmar now that cause suffering to other civilians. In the meantime, of course, the United Nations, in line with what the minister said, continues to operate in Rakhine State. UNHCR and UNDP in particular have a memorandum of understanding, as you know, that they continue to implement to try and create conditions for the Rohingya refugees to return eventually from Bangladesh. And I think it is important, and again, this is outside the scope of the JRP, to continue to pay attention also to those efforts. This is what most refugees want. They want to go back, but they want the conditions for them to go back to be safe. They want to have freedom of movement. They want to have access to services. They want the discrimination to end. So that is a very important aspect of the work that needs to, or of the context that needs to be highlighted. Meanwhile, of course, we need to continue to support refugees, to support host communities, and to support the government of Bangladesh. Everything has been said about that. And I do agree very much with the minister. You know, this is a temporary arrangement, but of course, unfortunately, this is a rather protracted temporary arrangement. And it is important that as we continue, Mia explained it very clearly, as we continue to provide humanitarian support, life-saving activities to the refugees, it is important on the one hand to make sure that we develop also a more sustainable form of support to the refugees, and that we help the host communities. And this is also what the JRP aims to do. And in order for that support to the refugees to be more sustainable, it is extremely important that issues that have been raised by Antonio Vitorino about security measures over-limiting the movement of refugees, the ability for them to move, and I think this needs to be continuously discussed with the government. We fully understand their concern, but if we want to make this existence more sustainable, we have to also give some space to the refugees. Likewise, for what concerns access to livelihoods and access to education, that has been flagged very importantly by everybody. I do agree also very much with the focus on environment and on re-greening that area, as Mia put it, because as we all know, that has been a tremendous impact. Maybe a few words to also recall, since I think nobody has mentioned that, but this is very important, that this is an appeal worth $943 million, and we do need contributions. It's 134 partners appealing for this amount of money. It seems a lot. It's really $2 per refugee per day. So it's not it's not an enormous amount of money. And that, of course, encompasses also almost 500,000 Bangladeshi nationals of the host communities that will also benefit from this assistance. Among other things, I would like to flag that among the purposes of the Joint Response Program is to mainstream some important approaches that have been partly mentioned in respect of disabled refugees, in respect of a better gender approach, gender equality in the work that is done there. Much of the appeal, or parts of the appeal, are destined to strengthen protection measure, and Orla Murphy was very clear on this and described very well the challenges that we have in that area. And of course, let me repeat it again. An important purpose will be to implement the scale up of the Myanmar curriculum, of the decision mentioned by the state minister to approve the Myanmar curriculum, which hopefully will give an opportunity to the Rohingya refugees to have access to education. This is now, I would say, one of the highest priorities that we need to work on. Of course, COVID has limited the rollout of that decision, the implementation of that decision, but once facilities are reopened, we must prioritize that, because this is part of that space, of that sustainability that I was mentioned. Let me also say that I hear what Orla said about the voice of refugees. I think that unfortunately these meetings are difficult to organize, but I hope that the three voices that we heard as the last of the interventions will echo with everybody. Runa was very, I think, very moving in the way she described also the humanitarian character, the empathy that we should have with the people. So it's good to hear their voice. And let's not forget also that the refugees do not simply have a voice to ask for things, but participate in the response. The Rohingya volunteers in the camps were instrumental, for example, after the fire a few months ago, to try to bring relief and try to save the lives of people. And so I'll conclude here by really making an appeal to all of you today and in the next few weeks, of course, to be very concrete. We have a dozen speakers today from different governments. We will listen to them now. Others are missing. I hope that all of you participating today will also help us reach out to other governments for support. I note, for example, that we do not have any speaker from the Gulf region. It is very important that we all reach out to donors in the Gulf region. In the past, they've been very generous on this issue, and this needs to continue. So it's really an appeal I'm making to everybody here. Thank you very much, dear fellow panelists, minister, and colleagues and friends. And it is, I think I look at my minders here. I can open the speakers list. Actually, the speaker list is already in front of me. So the first speaker is in fact a recording by video due to time difference. We will hear from Nancy Jackson, who's acting as Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of Refugee and Population and Refugee Affairs in Washington and speaking for the United States. So let's put the video on.
The United States is proud to be the leading donor to the Rohingya humanitarian response since the onset of this crisis. I'm pleased to announce today that the United States is providing nearly $155 million in new humanitarian assistance, much of which will go toward the 2021 Bangladesh Joint Response Plan. With this new funding, our total humanitarian assistance for this response reaches more than $1.3 billion since 2017, including more than $1.1 billion for programs inside Bangladesh. This new funding allows our partners to continue providing life-saving assistance to the nearly 900,000 Rohingya refugees who have taken refuge in Bangladesh, including the more than 740,000 Rohingya who, in 2017, were forced to flee ethnic cleansing and other horrific atrocities and abuses in Burma's Rakhine State. This funding also provides support for more than 472,000 Bangladeshi host community members impacted by this displacement. U.S. humanitarian assistance for this crisis supports all sectors of the response, including education, emergency telecommunications, food security, health, nutrition, protection, shelter and relief items, and water, sanitation, and hygiene. We applaud humanitarian actors for a well-coordinated humanitarian response, including the prevention and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, environmental programs, and the planned Myanmar curriculum pilot program. We commend the many countries that have supported this response, but more assistance is required to meet the humanitarian needs of the most vulnerable in Bangladesh and Burma. We therefore urge other donors to come forward now with additional funds to sustain and increase support for the response. The United States recognizes the challenges and responsibilities that the response has placed on the government and people of Bangladesh, and we reiterate the continued commitment of the international community to addressing this crisis. In the aftermath of the February 1 coup and the brutal military crackdown in Burma, our commitment to the people of Burma, including Rohingya refugees, is unwavering. We will continue to support Bangladesh as well as other countries in the region that have made the humanitarian gesture to receive Rohingya refugees. We continue to call on all states to provide humanitarian assistance and ensure protection of vulnerable Rohingya. We have repeatedly and strongly condemned the February 1 military coup in Burma. We are pressing the military regime to stop the violence, release all those unjustly detained, and immediately restore Burma's path to democracy. As we promote accountability for all those responsible for the coup and human rights abuses. Many of those who led the military coup in Burma are the same individuals responsible for the atrocities against Rohingya. We urge Bangladesh to continue protecting refugees, particularly at this time of increased risk to them, and acknowledge its assurance that it will not return them to a country where they could face persecution and violence. We are concerned by the shrinking humanitarian and protection space in Cox's Bazar. The increase in restrictions on humanitarian partners adversely affects the delivery of life-saving services. The United States encourages the government of Bangladesh to establish greater access to livelihoods and educational opportunities for Rohingya refugees, and to reinitiate protection activities, even as we continue to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. We also urge facilitation of prompt and safe responses to disasters, such as the devastating fires in the Cox's Bazar camps. On Bhasan Char, the United States welcomes the dialogue between the UN and the government of Bangladesh, and we encourage continued close consultations. We reiterate any relocations of refugees to Bhasan Char must be voluntary, and refugees' right to freedom of movement must be respected. We also urge Bangladesh to grant the UN independent access to refugees on the island, as well as approval to conduct a comprehensive technical and protection assessment. I want to end by joining the government of Bangladesh, the UN, and IOM in calling for durable solutions for the Rohingya people. Thank you.
We thank very much the United States. I don't know if I'm sure there's somebody online to convey our thanks to Nancy for her statement, and above all for the extremely generous contribution that already funds 15% literally of this appeal. So I truly hope that others, as was mentioned by Nancy Jackson, can join the United States in expressing concrete gestures of support. And it is my pleasure now to give the floor to Michael Köhler, Deputy Director General of DG ECHO of the European Commission. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Felipe. Hope you can hear me well. Dear High Commissioner, Honorable State Minister, Director General Vitorino, Resident Coordinator Ms. Seppel, dear speakers, excellencies. I'm honored to provide these remarks on behalf of the European Union, its member states, and Norway on the occasion of this important launch of the 2021 Joint Response Plan for the Rohingya refugee crisis. 4 years after the mass displacement of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh, the European Union, its member states and partners remain strongly committed to supporting the humanitarian effort in Bangladesh and to responding to the humanitarian needs of the refugee population and host communities, as expressed in the Joint Response Plan. In 2021, the European Union member states and Norway have already allocated nearly 30 million euros in humanitarian assistance. In addition to these humanitarian response plan humanitarian contributions, development funding to Cox's Bazar district continues to support host communities in social, educational, economic, and environmental sectors, among others. Through coordinated, integrated programming, refugees and host communities can mutually be supported with positive dividends for both. The European Union and partners fully support the strategic objectives of the Joint Response Plan, including the strong focus on the protection of all refugees, women and men, girls and boys, and vulnerable local communities. In Bangladesh and all over the world, the past year brought extreme and unexpected challenges. Responding to the COVID-19 crisis has strained resources and obliged humanitarian responses to adapt to changing circumstances. The prompt response from the government of Bangladesh and humanitarian partners alike has undoubtedly saved lives and helped to mitigate the impact of the virus in the refugee camps. The inclusion of the refugees in the national health response, and particularly in the vaccination plan, is commendable and an important step towards preventing a further spread of the disease. However, over the past year, the restrictions accompanying the COVID-19 response has led to worsening conditions for the most vulnerable refugees. The suspension of key protection and education activities has particularly affected the lives of women and children in both refugee and host communities. We hope that this can be addressed as an urgent priority. This is why the European Union and its partners urge the timely extension of critical activities, especially the vital protection and education interventions, to prevent a further erosion of protection space for the refugees and for vulnerable local communities. In response to the Rohingya crisis, the principles of safety and freedom of movement are fundamental. access to livelihoods, opportunities, and social services for both refugees and local communities is also essential to ensure lives can be lived in dignity, even during a temporary displacement, and to reduce full dependency on humanitarian aid. Above all, the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar requires a political solution, a solution that addresses its root causes in Rakhine State and is based on all recommendations made by the Rakhine Advisory Committee. The European Union is deeply concerned about the worsening human rights and humanitarian situation in Myanmar since the military coup, including for the Rohingya. The European Union continues to call on the military junta to immediately end all acts of violence and stands in solidarity with all those advocating for and working towards an inclusive democracy and the respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Rohingya refugees should be able to return to their homes. However, until conditions for a voluntary and sustainable return in safety and in dignity are in place, the European Union and its partners remain at the side of the government of Bangladesh in its response to the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ambassador Manley, permanent representative of the United Kingdom at the UN in Geneva. The floor is yours, Simon.
Hi, Commissioner, Filippo, Director General, Vitorino, Minister, colleagues, thanks very much. And thanks very much for the very moving testimonies of those working on the ground on this crisis. We're almost 4 years into the crisis, as others have said, and a durable solution for the Rohingya people, sadly, seems to remain as elusive as ever. And of course, our task has been further complicated, as you said yourself, High Commissioner, by the COVID pandemic, but also by the coup in Myanmar. And like others here, we have, of course, deplored in the strongest possible terms that coup, and we've been concerned in particular at the worsening human rights and humanitarian situation. And I think many of you would have seen the statement made by G7 Foreign and Development Ministers meeting in London just 2 weeks ago. We remain steadfast in our resolve to pursue a political solution, despite all of that, a solution that delivers safe, voluntary, and dignified returns by the Rohingya to their homes in Rakhine State, as well as genuine accountability for the atrocities that have been committed against them. And like others here, High Commissioner, we remain heartfelt in our appreciation to the government of Bangladesh and to the Bangladeshi people for hosting so many refugees and for their commitment to help and to protect them. And for as long as it remains necessary for Bangladesh to provide a safe harbor for the Rohingya that preserves their dignity and their human rights, it is right that the international community should provide practical and political support. So, Filippo, in response to your request to put our money on the table, let me announce today that the UK will continue to play its part through a new contribution of more than £27.6 million for the Joint Response Plan. And that is the latest tranche of more than £320 million that the UK has given since 2017. And through this support, we are both investing in the refugees' future and assisting the neighbouring Bangladeshi communities. And this, I should add, is in addition to our contributions through the Education Cannot Wait initiative and the Global Partnership for Education. Equipping the Rohingya with education and skills and giving them the opportunity to serve their refugee communities as volunteers are essential, in our view, to prepare them for a successful future return and for avoiding a descent into despondency, criminality, and insecurity whilst they remain in Bangladesh. Our yardstick this year, therefore, should be tangible process on the safety and the well-being of refugees and their hosts. And this, to pick up points made earlier, must include tackling in a comprehensive way the increase in violence against women and girls. And we hope we can work closely with the government of Bangladesh on this. Once again, I thank all those involved, international organizations, fellow governments, civil society, NGOs, the people of Bangladesh, and the Rohingya themselves for their efforts to respond to this tragic crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Simon, including for the very generous pledge that the United Kingdom has announced. Much appreciated. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland, Manuel Bessler, Deputy Director General of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Manuel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, host. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I want to echo very much what was said. We have here now the fourth response plan, which demonstrates commitment, first of all, by the Bangladeshi government, by the international community, to respond to the tremendous needs of the refugee, but also of the host community. And Switzerland, to this end, wants to clearly confirm here we stay fully engaged and will remain so to contribute to the ongoing response efforts. We recognize the great efforts of the government for the refugee and want to encourage them to continue with this support that we will help to maintain. This year, Switzerland will provide 6.5 million US dollars for the implementation of this response plan that we very much support and want to encourage to continue. Switzerland will also provide further 2.2 million US dollars for development activities in the Cox's Bazar district, notably through a joint humanitarian development nexus program, which both the refugee and the host community will benefit. Switzerland's humanitarian support focuses primarily on protection and against gender-based violence, and for accountability, for water, sanitation, hygiene, as well as access to education. In the video, we saw how education is direly needed and how the people, and particularly the youth, and particularly women and girls need education and want education. So we support that and want to help to make it possible. Empowering communities to play an active role in humanitarian response is key. Therefore, Switzerland will continue also to encourage community-based planning and consultations. We also want to commend the government, the Bangladesh government, for the effort to mitigate the negative effect of the ongoing pandemic in the refugee camp and host community, and hope this will allow the resumption of comprehensive service delivery as soon as possible, including, of course, education, as we saw. Improving access to livelihood opportunities in the Cox's Bazar district for the Rohingya refugees and the host communities is as well fundamental. In closing, Chair, Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen, want to emphasize again, Switzerland will continue to engage with all stakeholders to facilitate the conditions for a safe, for a voluntary, and a dignified and a sustainable return of the Rohingya refugees to Myanmar. In the meantime, my country remains fully committed to work alongside the government of Bangladesh and the international community to address effectively and in a principled manner the needs of this crisis. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. Thank you, Manuel, also for the pledge and for Switzerland's continued engagement. I now give the floor to Ambassador Sally Mansfield, permanent representative of Australia at the United Nations in Geneva. Sally, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much indeed, Filippo, and to your colleagues. A special thank you to His Excellency, the State Minister, for joining us, and of course for the extraordinary contribution that's been made by the government of Bangladesh, and indeed by Bangladeshis. It is unfortunate, it is sad that we still have to come together, but it's also obviously incredibly important that we do, given that the fundamental issue has not been resolved. Australia remains concerned for the 1.3 million people requiring humanitarian assistance in Cox's Bazar. And again, we acknowledge the sustained generosity of the government of Bangladesh and that of local communities in hosting the Rohingya refugees, and really do commend the refugee community for their ongoing contributions. So from an Australian perspective, we absolutely remain committed to working with Bangladesh and the humanitarian community. Since 2017, Australia has provided over Australian dollars 270 million, including about 80 million in 2021, for food, clean water, shelter and health assistance in Cox's Bazar. Australia's contribution has helped alleviate the pandemic's impact, particularly for women and girls and people living with disabilities. We were also pleased to provide additional support for the recovery efforts following that devastating fire in March. We would like to welcome the JRP's focus on finding sustainable solutions and providing life-saving assistance and protection to those in need. We again affirm the critical work of local and international organisations that are equipping Rohingya refugees with skills and education, giving them hope for the future and helping prepare for the voluntary returns to Myanmar when it is safe to do so. And Filippo, thank you for bringing those voices of the refugees into the room today. I think it's incredibly important that we hear the voices directly, as our colleague from the international NGO community also mentioned. Australia is very concerned by reports of the deteriorating conditions in the refugee camps since the pandemic began, and these, of course, have exacerbated protection concerns. But the impact that you've highlighted on things like education is also really something that's important that we keep very much front of mind. We encourage all the authorities to ensure humanitarian actors have full and safe access so that they can deliver services and protection to the most vulnerable, and to emphasise the importance of maintaining humanitarian principles. We remain committed to working with the government of Bangladesh, regional governments, ASEAN and the international community to support durable solutions to this crisis. This includes advocating for accountability in injustices and human rights violations committed in Myanmar, and for the voluntary, safe and dignified return of Rohingya families. We recognise that the long-term resolution will be born of regional cooperation and greatly welcome ASEAN's efforts and leadership in this area. So to you, Filippo, and to your team, to again the government of Bangladesh, enormous thanks, and of course to Antonio Vitorino and the work being done in the migration sector. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Sally. I now give the floor to Ambassador Sadiq Arslan, Permanent Representative of Turkey at the United Nations in Geneva. Sadiq, the floor is yours.
Good morning, High Commissioner Grandi, Director General Vitorino, Honorable State Minister Shahriar Alam, and distinguished participants. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes, very well.
Thank you, dear Filippo, for organizing this important event along with your stakeholders, Mr. Vitorino and other colleagues and friends. Of course, the plight of Rohingya Muslims continues to be a grave humanitarian crisis, and Turkey has been following the crisis closely from the outset and has been involved in humanitarian activities in both Myanmar and Bangladesh to alleviate the sufferings of the Rohingya. Unfortunately, in the aftermath of the military coup in February this year, the conditions in the Rakhine state in Myanmar are even less conducive to the repatriation of the Rohingya. We strongly condemn the military coup and disproportionate use of force by the security forces against peaceful protesters. Despite the gloomy situation in Myanmar after the coup, international community should sustain its efforts to find a lasting solution to the crisis, which entails voluntary, safe, dignified, sustainable return of all Rohingya refugees to their homeland. Dear colleagues, as you are well aware, on behalf of the OIC Ad hoc Ministerial Committee on Accountability for Human Rights Violations against the Rohingya, Gambia filed a case at the International Court of Justice against Myanmar in December 2019 on the accounts that they are committing genocide against the Rohingyas. My country has provided financial contribution to funds set up by the OIC General Secretariat to share the cost of proceedings. We believe that this case is instrumental to raise awareness concerning the plight of the Rohingya refugees who have been torn apart from their homeland by Myanmar authorities and stranded in refugee camps, mainly concentrated in Bangladesh. Under the circumstances, of course, my country will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to Rohingyas and their host communities. Our humanitarian efforts and projects concerning Rohingyas have amounted to more than $70 million in recent years. This support is widespread and includes different services. Here I would like to highlight one of them, as it is related to the recent developments. We operate the only field hospital in Sector 9 of the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar. Unfortunately, the said hospital has been providing vital services to the Rohingya in this region has been rendered completely inoperable by the tragic fire that took place last March. However, Turkish aid agencies quickly mobilized to resume their support to the region after the disaster, including daily food assistance and reconstruction of the shelters. In this regard, our new field hospital has begun providing 24-hour emergency services from the location of the original hospital as of 16th of April. Dear colleagues, as the largest refugee hosting country in the world, we fully understand and commend the enormous generosity of the Bangladeshi government and its people. Bangladesh has so far displayed an exemplary humanitarian approach towards more than 1 million refugees, despite their limited resources available. The international community should do more to share the burden of Bangladesh. In this regard, we hope that joint response plan will guide us all to intensify our joint efforts, could make a real difference in elevating the lives of the Rohingyas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, dear Sadiq, for your contribution. And I will now give the floor to Ambassador Dato Dr. Faisal Muhammad, Permanent Representative of Malaysia to the United Nations in Geneva. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Filippo Grandi, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Honorable Muhammad Sharia Alam, State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, Mr. Antonio Vitorino, Director General of the International Organization for Migration. Thank you for convening this important and timely meeting. The Joint Response Plan has provided a consistent framework for the channeling of assistance to the Rohingya refugees. We are pleased that the JRP has provided renewed attention on the impact of the Rohingya humanitarian crisis on vulnerable groups, particularly women and children, and welcome efforts to promote gender mainstreaming into assessments contained in the JRP. We also note the positive efforts to mainstream disaster risk reduction strategies in all sectors. Malaysia joins others in commending both the government and host communities of Bangladesh on the assistance provided to Rohingya refugees. Malaysia urges the international community to continue to support Bangladesh in this endeavor. Malaysia currently hosts more than 100,000 Rohingyas, representing the largest Rohingya refugee community in Southeast Asia. While Malaysia is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 Protocol, Malaysia remains fully committed to the principles of international law and non-refoulement. Consistent with the principles of international law, Malaysia has also continued to render assistance to undocumented migrants who are registered with the UNHCR on humanitarian grounds. The government of Malaysia continues to cooperate with UNHCR and other international organizations on all matters relating to refugees and asylum seekers. The Malaysian government has continued to provide assistance to Rohingya refugees, both in Cox's Bazar and Malaysia. From November 2017 to March 2020, the government established the Malaysian Field Hospital in Cox's Bazar, which succeeded in providing medical treatment to more than 100,000 Rohingyas. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Malaysian government has recognized that no one is safe until everyone is safe. In February 2021, the Prime Minister of Malaysia launched the National COVID-19 Immunization Program, which aims to vaccinate as many people residing in Malaysia as quickly as possible. The vaccine will be provided to all citizens and non-citizens of Malaysia, including the Rohingya community. In addition, Rohingya UNHCR cardholders are only charged 50% of the rate for non-citizens whenever they seek medical treatment at government-run healthcare facilities in Malaysia. The Rohingya community also has access to clinics operated by NGOs for medical care and assistance. Rohingya children in Malaysia have access to education within their own community schools and alternative learning centers, ALC. The curriculum of the community schools and ALCs are based on the country of origin or third country to facilitate immersion when they return or are resettled. The Malaysian government has also provided access to work through various trial projects. Malaysia continues to monitor developments in Myanmar and the impact of these developments on the Rohingya community, both in northern Rakhine and elsewhere. Malaysia calls on the Myanmar military and all relevant parties to end violence and give utmost priority to the maintenance of peace and security, uphold the rule of law, and resolve any disagreement through established legal mechanisms and dialogue. Malaysia will continue to work with ASEAN member states in facilitating Myanmar towards finding a peaceful and sustainable solution to its current crisis, so that Myanmar can progress and attain all of the ASEAN principles. As a neighbor and fellow member of ASEAN, Malaysia will continue to play a constructive role towards the maintenance of a peaceful, stable, and prosperous ASEAN. In this regard, Malaysia would like to register its appreciation for the UN's continuous effort and support for ASEAN's role in addressing the situation in Myanmar. Malaysia feels that it is immensely important for all parties to work with ASEAN to find a peaceful and sustainable solution to the conflict in Myanmar. Malaysia hopes that the current situation in Myanmar will not have an adverse impact on the repatriation of displaced Rohingyas returning to Myanmar. In this context, Malaysia calls on Myanmar to remain resolute in delivering its commitment to begin and ensure effective repatriation and protect the human rights of the returnees. As a country directly impacted by the crisis in Rakhine State, Malaysia also reiterates its appeal to the international community to continue supporting ongoing efforts towards a safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable return of displaced Rohingyas to their place of origin in Rakhine State. In the spirit of burden and responsibility sharing, we urge members of the international community, including signatories of the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 Protocol, to open their borders to the Rohingya community for resettlement in their countries. We also urge UNHCR, in cooperation with other UN agencies such as UNODC, to make it a priority to urgently address human trafficking by unscrupulous syndicates preying on the Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your intervention and Malaysia's support. I now give the floor to Mr. Sang Beom Lim, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations in Geneva. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. High Commissioner. First, let me start by thanking all the panelists for sharing their insights. Indeed, as we have seen in the video clip, it has been 4 years since the sudden influx of the Rohingya refugees into the Cox's Bazar in 2017. The plight of the refugees and host communities are continuously growing, especially with COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, we echo other delegations to thank the Bangladesh government and its people for showing the extraordinary spirit of the solidarity despite their challenges. Secondly, we affirm that we value this joint response plan as a crucial mechanism. It allows all humanitarian actors on the ground can respond collectively and effectively. It is welcoming to see the more focus on supporting the host communities in a specific strategic objective. We commend UNHCR and IOM for the hard work with close collaboration with the stakeholders, including the local government. Lastly, the Republic of Korea has been part of the international solidarity since the outset of this crisis. This year, I'm happy to announce our financial contribution of $5.5 million for supporting activities under the JRP. The part of the contribution, $1 million was already disbursed earlier this year to support the IOM's response to the tragic fire in Cox's Bazar. I want to take this opportunity to reaffirm our government's steadfast commitment for the cause and the long-term solution. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, also for the financial contribution that you announced. I now give the floor to Ambassador Ken Okaniwa, Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan at the United Nations in Geneva. Ken, you have the floor.
Thank you, High Commissioner Grandi. State Minister Alam, Director General Vitorino, ladies and gentlemen. Japan welcomes the launch of the 2021 JRP and expresses its appreciation to the government of Bangladesh and the UN team and its partners for their hard work under the current circumstances. Japan expresses its gratitude to the government of Bangladesh for its continuous generosity in accepting and protecting about 900,000 displaced persons from Rakhine State, Myanmar. Japan also commends the efforts by the government of Bangladesh and the UN agencies concerned and their partners to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the densely populated areas in Cox's Bazar. Since 2017, Japan has provided about $155 million in assistance for improving the living conditions of the displaced persons and host communities in collaboration with UN agencies and NGOs. This February, Japan and UNHCR signed an agreement on a $9.4 million project for the improvement of the water supply and distribution system in Cox's Bazar. Japan hopes that this 3-year project will not only improve the water supply, but also contribute to enhancing harmonious coexistence in the host communities. In addition, Japan extends emergency support to those affected by the recent large-scale fire in the camp. Regarding the displaced persons in Basan Char, Japan welcomes the recent development of discussions between the government of Bangladesh and UN, and expects further progress of the discussions, including UN operational engagement to fulfill humanitarian needs of displaced persons. The international community should work together to improve the situation in the camps and the host communities in Bangladesh. At the same time, we should remain committed to realize the safe, voluntary, and dignified repatriation of displaced persons to Myanmar and create an environment conducive to the repatriation, notwithstanding the current political situation in Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Ken. I now give the floor to Ambassador Rongvuthi Viraput, Deputy Permanent Representative of Thailand at the United Nations in Geneva.
Thank you, High Commissioner Gandhi. The Honorable State Minister Mohammad Sharia Alam, Director General Vitorino, distinguished delegates. Thailand wishes to thank the High Commissioner and the panelists for the briefing and relentless work on the ground. We appreciate the government of Bangladesh for their continued efforts to look after 100,000 of displaced persons in Cox's Bazar, particularly during the challenging time of the COVID-19. We also share the international community concern on humanitarian needs of the displaced person. On our part, the Royal Thai government has thus far donated $750,000 to Bangladesh through ICRC, UNHCR, IOM, WFP, and Bangladesh Red Crescent Society, including the latest one in the amount of $50,000 to WHO last year. We commend this joint response plan initiative and others that aim to maintain the momentum of support needed for the displaced person. The reason of which we participated in the donor conference on sustaining support for the Rohingya refugee response in October 2020. We stand ready to provide additional humanitarian assistance if needed. On another front, apart from implementing numerous projects in Rakhine State that we hope can contribute to the sustainable development, Thailand reaffirmed the support for a more visible and enhanced role of ASEAN to help Myanmar in facilitating repatriation, providing humanitarian assistance, and promoting sustainable development in Rakhine State. In this connection, we are supporting the implementation of 3 priority projects based on ASEAN preliminary need assessment recommendation, namely A, the provision of biometric machine at reception and transit center, B, the provision of agricultural equipment, and C, the renovation of fish and shrimp pond in Rakhine State. We support and look forward to the commencement of work of Special Envoy of the ASEAN Chair on Myanmar in assisting the facilitation of the work of ASEAN in providing humanitarian assistance to Myanmar, including the repatriation process in Rakhine State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Mr. Hong Won-yu of the Canadian Permanent Mission in Geneva, representing Canada. And this is the last speaker on my list, unless anybody else wants to speak. You have the floor. Canada, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, High Commissioner. And many thanks to this distinguished panel for sharing their reflections at the beginning of this meeting. As we approach the 4th anniversary of the massive influx of Rohingya refugees into Bangladesh from Myanmar, our thoughts are firmly with the refugees themselves. They have suffered through the traumas of their exodus, and they long more than any of us for durable solutions. To that end, Canada has called for accountability and has been deeply engaged in supporting efforts to address the root causes of violence and persecution in Myanmar. However, recent developments in Myanmar do not bode well for voluntary, safe, dignified, and sustainable returns. We deplore the coup and are deeply concerned about the violence, the attacks on civilians, and increasing displacement, but welcome all efforts to reverse this trend. But in the meantime, we remain grateful to the government and people of Bangladesh for their generosity in providing asylum and hosting Rohingya refugees. We fully realize the challenges that hosting such a large number of refugees poses for Bangladesh, and we realize that international solidarity is crucial. In that regard, we are pleased to announce that Canada has already committed 20.3 million Canadian dollars in humanitarian assistance for 2021. This funding is fully aligned with the 2021 JRP, and this brings Canada's total humanitarian funding to over 130 million Canadian dollars since 2017. Canada's support in refugee contexts is grounded in a protection framework, and we recognize the importance of supporting protection services and actors for these vulnerable populations, including protection against SGBV. You can count on Canada's sustained support. Moving forward, we will continue to provide humanitarian funding as well as development assistance to host communities. And Canada supports comprehensive approaches, and we would like to underscore the importance of education, skills training, and livelihood activities, and join others in urging for expanded access. These activities will support sustained returns in the future and promote resilience and psychosocial well-being in the present. Finally, congratulations to IOM, UNHCR, and the resident coordinator for developing the 2021 JRP. We call on donors to provide financial support. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Canada for your intervention. This brings to an end the speakers list. Let me just make a few closing remarks, Minister, if you allow me. First of all, thanks to all those who made fresh pledges. Now, everything has to be double checked by the experts, as you know, but at the first glance, we had 4 fresh pledges from the United States, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and the Republic of Korea, amounting, to the best of my knowledge, to $206 million. That's what was pledged today. But we should not forget, and some of the speakers, including Canada, reminded us that some states had already pledged before to the program, basically. I think approximately $150 million. So if you add up the two, you have $360 million already pledged against a total of more than $900 million requested under the JRP. So we must be at a level of 35%, 40% to 40% funding of the JRP. I recall that at the end of the previous JRP, that was funded just almost 60%. So I hope that we can make further progress from this good foundation, that other donors will come on board and will allow us to exceed also the funding, the percentage of funding of last year. A few other final messages that I wanted to share. I think we've heard from many of the partners that contributed a strong focus on the need to ensure not only life-saving assistance, not only more sustainable assistance to both refugees and the host communities, as I mentioned myself in my opening, but also an equitable balance between security measures that are taken by the government in the camp and the necessity to ensure the protection of all those that are especially most vulnerable. And there was some concern expressed about an erosion of that. I think that, of course, these are exceptional times due to the pandemic, but once we get out of this delicate phase, I think it will be important that the government, the United Nations agencies, civil society, we all focus on the protection of the most vulnerable in particular. I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't mention, and the minister did so in his opening, the initiative of the government to establish facilities in Basan Char for a number of refugees. The minister mentioned 18,000 that were already transferred to the island, and to up to a total of 100,000. That's the planning figure. And as the minister said, and many of you saluted that, we look forward to further discussions so that we can, through, and especially through further technical assessments of the situation on the ground, on the island, so that we can have a clearer sense of what interventions are needed on the part of the international community. The appeal made by the minister to consider that in the future, once this is done as an addition to the JRP, of course, is very welcome and agreed upon, and we look forward to further discussions, bearing in mind, of course, that as far as UNHCR is concerned, in any case, but this was echoed by other members, other participants in the meeting, it will be important to maintain, the minister mentioned it himself, the voluntariness of transfer to Basan Char, and it will be important to ensure that in Basan Char, refugees have access to livelihoods, can move, can have some freedom of movement. This is valid, I would say, both for Basan Char and for Cox's Bazar. So this is an area in which we have to work in parallel in the two locations. And finally, and since we have also among the participants today some member states of ASEAN, I think it's important to express gratitude for ASEAN. This was reported by both Malaysia and Thailand for ASEAN's role in continuing to address not only the overall crisis in Myanmar, which is of course quite complex, but also specifically the Rohingya crisis. One action should not eliminate the other. Otherwise, we risk making, being even further away from a solution of the Rohingya refugee crisis. We really need ASEAN support, as was mentioned by many. And if I can add also an additional appeal to ASEAN and to ASEAN countries to pay attention also to those refugees or those Rohingya directly from Myanmar who decide to take to the sea and embark on very dangerous journeys. Of course, we should not encourage those journeys. We should collectively remain vigilant on trafficking, as Antonio Vitorino said. But clearly, if people are in those difficult situations, they deserve to be rescued and disembarked. You know that some boats, unfortunately, that have left in the past few months, we've lost contact with. We fear that the people are no more, the people who had embarked on those journeys. So a strong appeal to ASEAN countries, but also to India and other countries in the region to do what Bangladesh has done, which is to rescue at sea people in its own waters. This is another important humanitarian appeal that I'd like to share with all of you. Thank you very much, friends, partners, colleagues. The minister, the director general, and I will hold a press conference at 12:30. So I'll see you in another virtual meeting to do that. And to everybody else, have a good rest of the day. And thank you very much for your participation, solidarity, and support.